حياكم الله من جديد. بعد ما حسينا كلنا أن شياب وكبار، بعد ما شاء الله عليه جوردن كان السبيتش ماله وايد انسبايرنج. نحن بعدنا متواصلين وباقينا لحد الحين another 2 sessions عشان يخلص اليوم. الحين بنبدأ الجلسة السادسة، وهي من أكثر الجلسات بتكون أهمية لليوم، لأن الكثير منا عنده نفس التساؤل. الجلسة تحت عنوان تخطيط المدن في اقتصاد المعرفة. فيها بنتعرف على بناء المدن اللي كلنا نبغي نعيش فيها، المدن التي يتوق الإنسان للعيش في هذه المدن، وأهمية الروابط الاجتماعية. كلنا عندنا تساؤلات، وين قاعدة تروح الروابط الاجتماعية في الحاضر، فكيف المستقبل، وأيضا مكافحة الشيخوخة. فيتحدث، بيكون معنا ضيف أكيد في هذه الجلسة وبيتحدث عن الموضوع بالتفصيل، ميك كورنيت، وهو عمدة مدينة أوكلاهوما. رحبوا معاي بميك كورنيت بليز. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is good to be back in Dubai. Okay, quickly, how many of you have ever been to Oklahoma? And look at the hands shoot up. A couple people have. I'm glad to hear that. So the rest of you have not been to Oklahoma and have no idea who I am. Well, let me give you a little bit of background on Oklahoma City, because of all American cities, no city has come as far, as fast as Oklahoma City. But frankly, it had a long way to go. If you go back to, say, 1990, Oklahoma City was the victim of its own problems. It had, through decades of having low standards, it had continually lowered itself as a city. In fact, the core of the city, the urban city, was in decay and people were moving out to the suburbs. You have heard of Oklahoma cities and cities in the United States and suburban sprawl. Well, Oklahoma City was a classic example of that. And the mayor at the time did a very ingenious thing, learning the hard way. He spent a year of his time and a lot of money trying to lure a large airline company to build a maintenance facility in Oklahoma City. It was going to bring $1 billion of annual economic income to the city, and we felt like this would really be the inspiration we needed to rebuild the economy. Well, at the end of the day, Oklahoma City was not chosen to be the site of that maintenance facility, and the airline told our mayor that the reason Oklahoma City didn't get the facility was that because the quality of life had sunk so low that they weren't interested in incentives, and it didn't really matter. They just couldn't imagine their employees living in such a dreadful place. With a new paradigm shift in order, the mayor started investing in downtown, started investing in the city, building water features, building performing arts centers, improving our horse show facilities, building new libraries, building sports arenas. We even put water in the river. Now, I know many of you come from cities where your river came complete with water, but in Oklahoma City, we just had a big ditch. There wasn't any water in it. But they built some dams and put water in the river, and the citizens were very, very fortunate and very, very pleased. The next mayor came along and invested in education, rebuilt or refurbished all 75 buildings in the inner city school district. And then in 2004, I was elected mayor, where I served for 14 years. Has anyone ever heard of the Oklahoma City Thunder, the NBA basketball team? Now I'm seeing hands go up and smiles going across faces. I felt like it was important that we improve Oklahoma City's brand and increase the awareness of Oklahoma City. I also started a dialogue about obesity, trying to take care of some of the health issues that plagued Oklahoma City. Through 30 years of mayoral leadership, we took care of the physical needs of downtown. We addressed some of the needs in our schools. We looked at the brand and bringing in an NBA basketball team to bring more culturally relevant, and we have an examination of health. And now we are starting to see that highly educated 20-somethings from around the country and indeed around the world are starting to come to Oklahoma City. And that's the basis of my new book, The Next American City, which talks not only about Oklahoma City, but this paradigm shift that shows that young, highly educated 20-somethings are not just moving to the big cities like New York and Chicago and Los Angeles in the United States. In fact, they're choosing purposefully these smaller communities between 100,000 people and 1 million people, where there's an affordable quality of life, where there's an abundance of fresh water and clean air, where there is a lack of traffic congestion. The quality of life in these cities, Oklahoma City being one of them, is amazing. And people are now in greater and greater numbers choosing to live there. And of course, any city that can attract highly educated 20-somethings is likely to succeed. You see my Twitter address up here. If any of you are on Twitter, if you would tweet that you are here, it would allow everyone in Oklahoma City to know that I made it. My wife would no longer be worried about me. So take a picture, send it out, and let people know that I'm here. While meanwhile, we look at what's going on around the world in cities, because the migration, the urbanization of people moving to larger places is continuing at an ever rapid pace. The top picture is Dubai. And we've got to see here is that as people continue to urbanize, where are we going to live? Europe and the United States have largely urbanized. About 80% of the people that live in that continent and in that country already live in cities. But China and India have a long way to go. Only 20% of India lives in a city. Only 50% of the Chinese live in major cities. And as that urbanization continues, we ought to be looking at what type of cities do we want to build. You know, we all live in cities that we didn't create. We inherited them from past generations. And so I think it's time to take a step back and say, what type of cities do we want? What type of cities do we want to create? How can we create wealth and happiness and a quality of life that will attract those highly educated people that are going to make us successful? Urban prosperity, peace and progress. Because urbanization is perhaps the greatest force that's shaping our futures. Sure, we have challenges, but the cities that make the human race smarter, healthier, happier, and wealthier. Who in here is happy? Yeah, we're happy. We may not be wealthier, but we're happy. We're healthier. We live in a wonderful time where technology is making a lot of things possible that previous generations have not had the opportunity to see. But we've got to prepare, and preparation is going to be the key to this positive change. Future citizens are going to demand much more from the places that they call home. So what can we do today to build cities that foster progress, build wealth, and embrace change? Let's stop there for a moment. Embrace change. I think intellectually we all like to think that we embrace change. But I can tell you, as the mayor of a large city for 14 years, people don't embrace change. I remember I had one initiative that I just knew was going to be wildly popular. Because we had designed the city much around the automobile, we didn't have a lot of pedestrian-friendly elements to our city. And so we figured out an initiative that was going to bring sidewalks to neighborhoods that didn't have sidewalks. We were going to be bringing in jogging and biking trails to neighborhoods who had never been connected to our larger bike and jogging community. And this seemed like a wildly popular idea. In fact, I was concerned that those neighborhoods who were not included might get upset. They might complain that they weren't part of the system. Well, just pretty much the opposite happened. Those neighborhoods who weren't connected, who weren't part of the system, their lives didn't really change. Apparently, they didn't really have the expectation that they would ever get sidewalks or that they would ever get attached to the biking and jogging trail. And so we really didn't hear from them in big numbers. But the neighborhoods where we did make these improvements, boy, did we hear from them. Suddenly, there's digging up their yards to put in a sidewalk. And in some sort of exasperation that I didn't see coming, we had people say they didn't want to be on the jogging and biking trail because they didn't want all these strangers coming into their neighborhood. Just when you think you have come up with a change that everyone will embrace, it's clear that they won't. In fact, I've decided that there are really three groups of people. Now figure out which one of these three you are. There is one group of people who will tell you that they do not like change. And then when you change something, you find out they were right. They're mad. They want to know why you changed something. There's another group of people, and this is a perplexing group of people. These people will tell you they like change, and then when you change something, you find out they were wrong. They're mad. They didn't want change to take place after all. And finally, there's a third group of people who will tell you they want change, and they really do love change. The problem is that that group is extinct. That group does not exist anywhere on earth. Change is not a natural consequence. Change is not something that we embrace naturally. Yet here we are talking about all the positive changes that are coming to our community. What all cities are competing for now is talent. We want those highly educated 20-somethings. For ages, cities competed for political control, powerful defenses, or the biggest machines. But today, successful cities will attract the most talented people to live, to work, and to play there. Aha, it's talent. That's what everyone's trying to compete with today. But how are we going to connect all these people? You know, I think we take for granted the ease in which we connect with one another today. Most of us have some sort of mobile device where we're constantly connecting. And it's not enough for us to connect to people we know with Twitter and with Facebook and other online platforms. We now connect with people we don't know. I have 24,000 followers on Twitter. I don't know them, but somehow I'm connected to them. And that connectivity is so important when you start to build a city. Because as you attract a highly educated person, when that person comes to the city, they not only bring themselves and their skills, but they also bring their connections. They also bring that larger connected world that they're with them. And so everybody that now comes brings in people that they know, inspirationally or personally, or through social media. Connecting those talented people is the most critical work that leaders can pursue. In a global talent market, connect people, build strong community, and deepen relationships around the world. Even if you've not been to a major world city, if you know people that are, if you're somehow connected to people through friends or through relatives or to social media, that connectivity has value. I remember when I was 9 years old, my parents invested in the technology of the day. They bought a telephone for their bedroom. Now, what was especially unusual from my world in the late 1960s was that this telephone was on the wall. Now, when you're 9 years old and your world isn't very big and you haven't seen a whole lot, seeing a new telephone on the wall can be a mind-blowing thing. And when I had friends over to play at my house, I would take them into my parents' bedroom and I would show them the phone that was on the wall. Well, fast forward, say 45 years. 3 years ago, my mother passed away, and I was back in the house because we had decided to sell it. And I was making what would be the final time to walk through the house where I had grown up. And so as I was walking through the home, you can imagine all the memories from my childhood that kept coming up as I went from room to room. And finally, I went into my parents' bedroom, and I saw that phone on the wall. And I couldn't help it. I walked over, and I picked up the receiver, and I listened. And that telephone was still working 45 years later. Now, the reason that moment had such an impression upon me was that I had another telephone in my pocket, and it was 2 years old. And I had already convinced myself, I got to get a new phone. It's 2 years old. Your telephone is not going to last 45 years anymore. If you don't continue to learn throughout your life, you're going to find yourself getting behind very quickly. When I grew up, I mistakenly believed that life came in two phases. There was a phase where you went to school, and then at some point, generally in your 20s, you stopped going to school and you went to work. School, work. As if there was a point where you could stop learning. Well, I found out the hard way. I got into my 50s, and I realized my education was outdated. It had been decades since I'd been in a formal classroom, and I could see how the world was changing. So I did a lot of research, and ultimately I wound up getting an MBA from New York University by flying to New York 45 times on weekends to continue my education. And I realized through that experience the importance of continuing to learn. Almost every community has institutions of higher learning. But how good of a job do we do of encouraging our older citizens to continue their education, whether through official, formal education experiences or online education experiences, or simply reading, but learning as we grow older is extremely important. And people are growing older and older. And so that initiative, pushing people to continue to learn, not just the kids, but older people, continuing to learn, is going to be extremely important. Our older people have the most experiences of anybody on earth. And somehow we have forgotten to keep pushing them into our educational system. Today, the most successful cities embrace a culture of lifelong training and learning. And of course, nothing is changing our cities more than technology. It's reinventing the global economy from the inside out. Citizens now expect cutting-edge ideas and constant change. And all you have to do is look at the computer or the telephone in your pocket and see the best examples right there before your eyes. But what are the most important aspects of the human existence? Healthcare? Well, think how technology is transforming healthcare inside of our cities. Think of the wearables that many of us now have on our wrist. This tells me when to get up, when to go to sleep, when to get up and walk around, and it measures so many different things that I can't keep track of it. And they tell us that the technology is going to continue to improve, that it can actually predict health events on us. You've all have read these stories, but think of the change in a lot of the rural areas where we can't have the type of hospitals and the type of medical care that people in cities can have. The idea that you can give people a warning about a health issue hours or days ahead of time could mean the difference between life and death. We all know the advances that are taking place in our educational system because of technology. You don't even have to be in a class anymore with online learning. But of all the technological changes, the one that's going to change the United States the most, and indeed most of the civilized world, is the invention and the implementation of the autonomous automobile. And keep in mind that not only will people not be physically driving their cars anymore, it appears people are moving into a shared economy at the same time. So 100 years ago, almost all American cities, at least the western part of the United States, were shaped by the automobile because people were buying cars and driving them for the very first time. And so as these cities began to develop, they were developed and designed around the automobile. Well, now here we are 100 years later, and those two forces are happening simultaneously. People are less interested in owning a car. They might want to lease it, but they might want to share it going forward. And if you ask the younger generation, those 20-somethings and the generation after them, they feel less and less inclined to own their own car. And of course, the autonomous vehicle itself offers great help down the line. It offers safety improvements. It offers less traffic congestion. In a completely ingrained autonomous system, think of how close the cars could be embedded together. Think of the increased capacity on our roads, and the idea that if these cars are all connected to each other, then they will no longer have to create large spaces in between them. Traffic congestion as we know it could disappear. But there are also other technological issues. If your autonomous car drops you off at the store and you go in the store, what is your autonomous car going to do? Is it going to go park itself somewhere 10 miles away? Are you going to tell it to just go around the block until you're ready to go? If everybody tells their autonomous car just to drive around the block until they're ready, we're going to have more cars on the road instead of fewer cars on the road. And of course, we're changing very quickly. In fact, in the United States, it seems like the cities that have accomplished the most have failed to plan for their achievements. We have, in many cases, created economies in these cities where the people that used to live there can no longer afford to live there. We've created traffic congestion where people continue to move further and further away. And great cities that resist continuously improving often become victims of their own success. This happens in the United States over and over and over again. Because so many of our initiatives have to go to a public vote, at least at the local government level, what you find is that people don't want to address a problem until it's been fully ingrained upon them, and then it becomes almost an emergency. Better forms of public transit take too long. The proper planning is not done. Without a focused strategy, cities are going to lose their competitive edge to the up-and-coming places. And there's the question of how are we going to pay for it? I mentioned in the United States that you usually have to go to citizens and get them to pass something going forward. And one of the interesting things is that if you asked a group of people who's more likely to accept change, who's more likely to accept a new idea, young people or older people, chances are younger people are going to be the ones that would like to see something different come forward. Yet, if you look at who votes, is it younger people or is it older people? Well, it's older people. Sometimes I think the art of politics in the United States is convincing older people that they should really build a city for younger people. And a lot of times the cities that are not able to progress are the ones that fail to communicate that message out adequately. You see cash-strapped countries, emerging economies struggle to embrace new opportunities. But building cities and getting things done is not enough. There's a brand new financing mechanism in the United States that just happened legislation a month ago. If you own stock or you sell a company in the United States, you incur what's called a profit, obviously, but it can be a capital gain. A capital gain requires a tax being paid. Well, they've come up with a new system called opportunity zones, where you can take those capital gains and invest them into areas that had not had a whole lot of investment in time. Areas that have been left behind. Census statistics showing that they need some additional investment, additional help. They need different avenues to rebuild those areas. The idea is that not just millions, not just hundreds of millions of dollars, but potentially trillions of dollars are going to be invested into these opportunity zones with the idea that it will reinvent and reinvest in some of these places that have not had their share of investment in the past. That's going to have significant changes in a lot of our cities, and it's going to bring a lot of outside capital to the table. It will not make a bad deal a good deal, but it makes a good deal a really good deal. And you're going to see investors in the United States more and more start to look at opportunity zones as a way to defer and in some cases avoid paying capital gains taxes altogether. So where are we now as we plan these cities for the knowledge economy? Every city out there is competing for that same group of young people, those highly educated 20-somethings. And ironically, what they're looking for is not really different than generations from the past. They're still looking for hope. They're still looking for opportunity. They're still looking for that dream, perhaps of owning their own home or owning their own business. But what they want is an opportunity to survive on their own merits. I think the previous speaker spoke loudly about the future and the confidence that we should all have in that next generation. I find it amazing how entrepreneurial that next generation has become. When I was 20 years old, I don't know that I could have defined entrepreneurship. I know I couldn't have spelled it. But yet here you have entrepreneurs in training over and over again. Young people in high schools are now being trained to be entrepreneurs. Whenever I see a millennial with a cell phone, I wonder to myself, I bet they're starting a business over there in the corner. They're that entrepreneurial, and it's that easy to move the economy today. Cities are going to have to make wise investments, and I think it's interesting that we're holding this conference here in Dubai because no city has embraced the connectivity better than Dubai. By a higher percentage, more people born other places that have moved here, and all of that connectivity and all of those connections come to Dubai with them. It is wonderful to be here, an honor to speak to each of you, and of course, always fun to get up and talk about American cities. Thank you very much. Thank you.